Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and the impulsive move that we've had since October. If you guys like the content, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. We're going to discuss this crazy move by Bitcoin, very impulsive. We had Steve from Crypto Crew University come on the show a few days ago. He discussed the idea of this impulsive move that we're having. I wanted to further break this down a little bit so we can sort of see what's going on and see how it's differing from the last cycle so far. So if you guys like the content, subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys for getting me to 200,000 subscribers. I really appreciate it. Give the video a thumbs up. Also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So at the time of the video, Bitcoin's at 56K. And we're flirting with price discovery mode yet again. So far, we've discussed this cycle, the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA being our historical support. This cycle, we've held it as support here, and you could argue that that's the only time. One might say that depending on what your tolerance is for, say, testing the 21-week EMA, you might assume that we had a test of it there. But if we were being strictly, say, if we were very strict with our definition of a test and say we really have to go down and touch it, then the only time so far we've tested the 20-week moving average or the 21-week EMA is back in September and early October. And since then, we have not really looked back, in contrast to the last cycle, where we had tested the 20-week moving average fairly systematically throughout the entire cycle. And this is why we've been discussing that so far, this cycle appears to be more representative or more similar to the cycle before, where we had substantial lengths of time between tests of the 20-week SMA or the 21-week EMA. And so this is, again, as we've said, we've drawn a lot of comparisons between this cycle and 2 cycles ago. It seems like this cycle has been we've had a lot more intra-cycle volatility than last cycle. It was a slow, methodical move up. But something that I think is interesting, we've never talked about this moving average before, and I don't really know how useful it is anyways, but if you pull up the 8-week moving average, you can see that last cycle, if we discuss the 8-week, anytime you dropped below the 8-week, it was basically the time to accumulate, because you could argue, you could look at the bull market support band and say that was definitely the time, but some of these wicks barely touched the 21-week EMA, and so you might look to say, okay, well, the 8-week moving average, whenever we drop below it, historically was a time to accumulate, and we dropped below it a lot. Look at this last cycle, and look how frequently we dropped below that 8-week moving average. It has no significance at all, for that matter. But then you look at the cycle before, and we essentially just rode up the 8-week moving average, just barely above it, right? Just barely above it here. We just kept moving up. And that's what it caused so bullish sentiment, right? It just felt like we could never have a substantial pullback because we were always ahead of where we were of an average of 2 weeks before, or 2 months before. We were always just ahead of it. We were constantly moving up. Maybe there would be some corrections on any given day, but back then on these weekly candles, it was more or less just straight up. We had a move here that went straight up for a while, and then we actually did go back down to this level. But this move here was a time when we tested it here, and then we didn't break through it for 100 and, well, we had wicks below it, but we didn't really have candles breaking below it for 126 days. Okay, now the reason I say that is because if you look at it today, we're essentially riding up this moving average in the same manner, in fact, to some degree, that we did back over here. There have been some weekly candle corrections, okay? It hasn't been as straight up as it was back then, but it's interesting to see that Bitcoin is not really giving people a huge opportunity to buy back in at a significant dip at this point, right? Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but so far it simply hasn't. And right now the 8-week moving average is at a modest 45,388, modest 45,387, somewhere in that ballpark. And you can see that we are fairly quickly moving up. Now we are flirting with price discovery mode. Okay, we're flirting with it. You can see that our prior all-time high is just over $58,000. We're about $900 or so away from the prior all-time high. We've seen before that once we get to the prior all-time high and start moving, things can get moving really quickly, right? Incredibly quickly. We could be moving up faster than we might imagine if in fact we're able to go back into price discovery mode. However, another way to think about this too is if this bull market is to last a while, and if we ever do get a substantial dip below the 8-week moving average, well, we'll at least recognize that it hasn't really happened yet this cycle, except for this wick right here. And so the bull market support band, which is what we've discussed before, I mean, we will go back to it eventually, but as we showed 2 cycles ago, it can be a while. It can be a substantial period of time before we test it. If we take a measured move, suppose we take a measured move from this point when we tested it, and let's ignore the wick. We're going to ignore the wick and just go to the day when we broke it. It was 231 days. 231 days. If we look at that from here and go out 231 days, that would put us in late May, potentially. Just to give you an idea of how long it's gone on in the past. Again, we're not saying it's going to go on like that forever, but it is something to keep in mind that we keep saying, you know, we will test it at some point. We're probably all going to have a lot more gray hairs by the time that happens. And whenever it does happen, it's going to be a very scary time. That's the one thing we can guarantee for a lot of people, is that it will be a scary time, because no matter where that top is before it goes back down to the 20-week, there will of course be people buying it at that global top before the retracement to the 20-week, and those people are going to be very, very scared at that time. So let's take this one step at a time, right? One step at a time. We're currently at 56K. Momentum is up. As we say every video, it's more likely to go up than to go down over the macro scale. We'll be wrong eventually, right? Because if we always say it's going to go up, then eventually we will be wrong. But that's where momentum is taking us, right? For now, the direction, I've always said momentum is, I don't believe in a lot of traditional technical analysis, but a lot of times momentum is something you can take to the bank. It's not financial advice, of course, but a lot of times momentum is something you can rely on until you can't, right? Until you can't. And that's one of the reasons why the stock market generally trends up, right? I mean, it's just momentum continues to carry it up, and always calling for a stock market crash will lead you to be wrong more often than you will be right, generally speaking, because if you always just say the stock market will go up, you'll be right a lot more frequently than if you're always claiming it's going to have a major correction. So I do think at some point in the next several months we will have a substantial correction that will be relatively scary, and it might not even be that far away, especially if we have like a very impulsive move from 56K up several more tens of thousands of dollars. Then things can get very heated very quickly. There's going to be a lot of volatility, more so than we've probably had in the last few weeks. It's been relatively quiet the last few weeks. We could get a lot of volatility. We could see price movements $10,000 to the upside, $10,000 to the downside. I think it's only going to get even more heated from here. If you guys like the content, please subscribe to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up. Check out the Telegram channel in the description below. Remember, we have the premium list altcoin season sale. You can find a link to that in the description below as well. You can lock in the lower rate. We'll let that go on for about 5 or 6 more days. Thank you guys for tuning in. Subscribe to the channel. Let's go for 300,000 subscribers. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.